Welcome everybody, this is John from Sow and Grow Regenerative. So I'm recording this as a video, as last session, unfortunately I had technical issues with my mic, and I didn't realise until about 40 minutes into it. So I've decided to kind of record this session on polycultures, so everyone can still have access to that on my YouTube channel. And really what I wanted to talk about today is what polycultures are, how they can benefit us, what polycultures are compared to monocultures, and the differences that we see in the yields that we get. Also, I'm going to touch on things like pest resistance, how polycultures can mitigate against changes in weather and climate. These are all really important aspects of the future. You know, as we see the changing climate, we're experiencing ever more erratic weather, and this is also affecting things like pests. So I think it was 2 years ago, there were plagues of locusts all out throughout Africa and some in Asia. This was actually due to infrequent, well, maybe not infrequent, but out of season rain, heavy rains. And as some of you may know, locusts can just sit there for, you know, years and years and years, their eggs just buried in the sand. And then when a lot of rain comes, they get triggered into hatching, coming out and decimating crops. One thing I'd like to add as a caveat to that, farmers that were treating their fields and their crops with chitinase actually were able to avoid these locust infestations, and their crops actually remained unscathed. Now, the reason for this is chitinase is actually made from the shells of insects, and what this does is it's almost like a repellent against things like locusts and anything that has a hard shell. So that's just obviously something added to the polycultures thing. But, you know, it's really important that we see polycultures as something that is inherent throughout all spheres of our planet. You know, we're not just talking about plants, we're also referring to animals, referring to society, we're referring to the soil biome, all the different animals and life microbes that exist within the soil, and even the relationships that we have between the earth and the sun and the solar system. These are all things I study, and I kind of amalgamate these things because I think to move forward and become more self-sufficient, grow our own food, it's really important that we consider these aspects of our universe as a whole system. You know, we're talking, permaculture is about a holistic view of nature, an holistic view of relationships. So without further ado, I will get on with sharing the presentation. If you guys have any questions, then please feel free to email me. If you don't have my email, it's sowseedgrowfeed@protonmail.com. I'd be happy to ask any questions in relevance to the video that I'm going to put out. But, you know, I want to encourage everyone to not just think of polycultures as a way to produce food, but it's about understanding the symbiotic relationships between the plants themselves and between the plants and the soil life, and extended out with the ecosystem in itself. So I'll kind of go through more of this as we go forward. but it's just something that I felt really important to mention. So here we go. So sow and grow regenerative, permaculture, regenerative mindset. And really what this is about is, this is why I've named this a regenerative mindset, because regeneration isn't just about, as I mentioned before, it's not just about our plants. It's really about how we can see the world through a different lens. You know, unfortunately, through our society, we've been conditioned to believe that other people need to do things for us, or other people need to tell us what to do. But we're autonomous beings. I mean, we're human beings, you know, we are capable of so much. And the way the world's going at the moment is there's more restrictions, there's less freedom, people are less connected to nature. And these things, including, you know, how we consume stuff, these things are actually making us less human. They're detaching us from nature. This makes us sick, both physically and mentally and emotionally, you know. And even if you can't, we need to express how we feel, you know. And I know myself, through growing food, what I've done is I've developed a better relationship with myself and a better relationship with other people. You know, I've learned to understand things more. I've learned to have more compassion, to have the courage to do what really resonates with my heart, you know, because we're in a time now where we have more opportunity than ever before, because things are changing so quickly. There's never been a time in modern history, including the world wars, where people have felt so uncertain, alone, and desperate, you know. And having this connection to nature really allows us to find who we are as a person, what we can give, what we can contribute, our purpose, you know. And you know, whether you study cosmology or soil science, or whether you look through a telescope or a microscope, everything is the same. These cycles and patterns are throughout the universe. They play out in psychology and they play out in nature in itself. So we'll get going. And as I said, if anyone has any questions, please feel free. I expect this to be about 45, 50 minutes. I'm not going to spoon feed anyone. I'm here to give information, and what I'd like to do is encourage you to do your own research. But it's really understanding the cycles and the patterns that is the fundamental thing that provides the framework which we can all build upon. And everything's contextual and individual. You know, it's subjective, it's relative. So here we go. So polycultures, what are they? Well, polycultures are relationships. They are, you know, relationships on many levels and dynamics. And as I alluded before, this isn't just for plants, this is for everything that we can see in our reality. But essentially, I'm going to run through a few different aspects of polycultures and how they kind of encapsulate in the permaculture framework. And then I'll expand upon those a little bit, and I'll give you a few ideas of what you can use as things like companion plants. But really, it's up to you, what you like to eat, what you think you can grow, what space you have. All these types of things have a relevance to what's going to be useful for you. So polycultures come in many different forms. They've been extended upon and expanded upon throughout permaculture, but you know, these types of relationships go back a long way, and really what they're based on is our observation of nature and how things play out in nature, the relationships that exist. That is really the fundamental point to all of this. So companion plants, most people would have heard about companion plants. These are plants that benefit each other in some way. So they can benefit each other by protecting each other. They can benefit each other by providing nutrients, or providing shade. You know, there's lots of different aspects to this. But the essential thing is, once we start to understand how these things fit together, we can actually start building our own ecosystem wherever we are. And guilds are an extension of companion plants. The most famous one is the Three Sisters. This was created by the Native Americans, and it's an amazing way to produce a high abundance of food that is less susceptible to pest and disease infestation. And Three Sisters actually provides most of what we need in regards to the nutrients. So next we have food forests and forest gardens. I've actually built a food forest on my allotment. It's a very small one, you know, 5 meters by 5 meters. So it's tiny, but the amount of food that you can grow in such a small area is quite incredible. And then agroforestry is the management of companion plants, guilds, food forests, etc. But it's basically a way of putting this into a business context where we can actually make money from this. And then we have silvopasture. Silvopasture is where you have rows of crops, and then you have animals grazing in between those crops, one for controlling weeds, also for fertilizing. You know, there's lots of different aspects to this. And then a little bit deeper, going into what polycultures are, we have the microbes, or the community of microbes in the soil. So that includes fungi, bacteria, the plant roots themselves, the nutrients. So we can even have polycultures, and we do have polycultures in animals and humans. You know, if you have a group of friends that really get on well together, each of those friends are going to bring something unique to the group to contribute. And also you can support each other in a particular way. I know right now, my small group of friends that I have, by choice, obviously, it's phenomenal how you help each other, you know, and you don't even have to do this consciously. You just do what's uniquely, you know, what you're passionate about and how you can contribute. So, and all of these things in permaculture are called stacking functions. So when you have an element, which can be a plant or an animal or a microbe, and it performs various functions, multiple functions, this is what we call stacking functions. So a plant can be used for eating, it can be used to prevent pests, it can be used to attract pollinators, it can be used as mulch. There's loads of different kind of caveats to that. So polycultures versus monocultures, as I'm sure all of you are aware, monocultures have ruled our agricultural systems for 70 plus years. And the reason that we grow monocultures really is down to the fertilizer industry. It seems like growing lots of one particular plant in a big space is a good idea. And I think many people did think that was a good idea until recently. But the problem is when you have no biodiversity, these particular systems, ecosystems, if you can call them that, are susceptible to attack from disease, pest. They are also susceptible to changes in weather and climate, so drought and flooding. And because you have no biodiversity in the plants, you have no biodiversity in the soil, which means the soil lacks structure. So it can't absorb and filtrate water. And therefore, when you have parts of the year where you don't have a lot of water, farmers have to provide a lot of water for their plants. Whereas if you had a polyculture system, the plants would be absorbing water, not just through rain, but also through air. You know, they can take H2O out of the air, you know, moisture, etc. We all know this. If you've ever seen programs about the desert, you get plants that can survive just on dew. So monocultures are a thing of industry. Polycultures are a thing of nature. You don't see anywhere on the planet that is just a monoculture, that is natural. So monocultures have had their day. They rely heavily on fertilizers, fungicides, insecticides, pesticides, which are all damaging to the environment. They kill the soil biome, they kill the fungi, they kill all the bacteria. And what we want to do is we want to create something that is beautiful, something that we can actually look at and go, wow, you know. And the best way to do this is observe nature and see how she does this. So on the left there, you have the start of the Three Sisters. As you can see, it looks really healthy. You know, we've got the corn, we've got the beans, and we've got the squash all sitting there. This was actually done by me and my friend Giuliano at our friend Roger's. He's got a bit of land near where I live, and he was kind enough to let us kind of build some raised beds for him. We did it free of charge. This was a few years ago. This was actually the start, 2020. And what we did is we were using our spare time to try and create something which would be an inspiration to him and to ourselves. And monocultures, you can obviously see the beets there. You know, great source of information, but when these things stand on their own, they have nothing to protect them. So how do plants benefit each other? Well, as I mentioned before, they are communities working in cooperation to benefit the whole system. So each individual element will bring something to the mix, whether it would be it is the plant that provides you with the biggest yield, it's the plant that fixes nitrogen, it's the plant that is very aromatic and deters pests, or it brings in pollinators. I mean, there's loads of different kind of variations to what each plant or each element can bring to the system. So polycultures are also biological. So the bacteria and the fungi, as well as the other microbes that exist in the soil, like the nematodes and the protozoa, even, you know, things like the worms, etc., are all performing a function biologically. They're all bringing something into the soil and even into the plants. You know, we're not just talking about that we have an ecosystem in the soil, we also have an ecosystem in the plant. There's bacteria that exist within the plant, and they are continually exchanging information with the plant themselves. So from the point of photosynthesis, where the plant actually turns through the chlorophyll action, turns the power of the sun, you know, the electromagnetic energy of the sun, into carbohydrates, which then releases it into the rhizosphere, which is the bit around the root. The microbes are constantly interacting in that interface. This is where the magic happens. This is where the immune system of the plant starts to become stronger. When we have no biology, we have a defunct system. The system cannot sustain itself. It's virtually impossible. And with a polyculture system, it's much easier to build that. You can build your soil up through amendments and through adding nutrients and biology itself. And that actually makes the whole ecosystem a lot stronger and more resistant. Biology also increases the immunity of the plants, and it forms endophytic relationships through those roots. So really the most essential thing is understanding that with just biology, it doesn't work. With just chemistry, it doesn't work. With just the physical aspect of the system, it doesn't work. We need everything, all of these things working in unison to bring health and abundance to our ecosystem. And that also includes us. So we are nature. You know, there's no dispute about it. The fungi and the bacteria that exist within the soil also exist within our own gut biome. This is why so many people are sick and have weak immune systems, is because we treat our ecosystems, our plants and our soil really badly. You know, we treat them almost with contempt, and that's only because we don't have a relationship with it. You know, so this polyculture thing goes much deeper. It's actually our relationship with the plants. This is really what I want to emphasize, because you can find out anywhere to grow food, right? There's so many people on the internet telling you how to grow food, but I want to offer something unique. I want to offer a much broader perspective. So chemically, we all know the periodic table. I hated it at school, but through permaculture and through soil biology and soil chemistry, I've started to understand just how important the chemical element, the nutrients and the elements that are stored within the soil are towards the whole ecosystem. So the exchanging of minerals and nutrients, the plants and the ecosystem of the soil is constantly sending signals to pests and beneficial animals. So when a system is weak, or when a plant is weak, it actually sends off a chemical signal to get attacked, to get eaten. I don't know if any of you have been growing, you've noticed that sometimes you might have a row of beans, for instance, and one of them gets eaten. That's because that one's weak, you know, and the strongest ones are going to survive. It's just like if you ever watch wildlife programs and you see a bunch of wildebeest running and the lions zoom in on one of those wildebeest, it's because it's the weakest one. They're always going to go for the weakest one because it's easiest. This is how nature works. This is how adaptation works. And it strengthens the whole system because, you know, we have to understand that, you know, this life and death cycle is inherent within everything. And obviously the beneficial animals as well. When plants get to the point where they're starting to flower, they are sending those signals off to the bees and the butterflies and the other pollinating insects that they are ready to be pollinated. They are ready to spread their seed. They're ready to start a new generation. And the insects provide this amazing purpose. You know, they are so tapped in to what they need to do. If you ever see a bee fly around flowers, even bees know just by flying over a flower whether it's been pollinated or not. You know, nature is magical. It's mystical. It's the most beautiful symphony orchestra that we will ever have the opportunity to experience. And once you get past the making mistakes and things failing, when you sit back and you just observe your own mini ecosystem, you know, whether it's a balcony or it's a farm, you can really start to understand our part in it. So also as well, you know, these nutrients and minerals, plants are storing these, you know, so that they're actually absorbing them through their roots. So for instance, things like comfrey, they absorb a lot of nutrients. There's other plants as well. And you can just cut these down and mulch them, and that will go back into the soil. So when you're thinking about polycultures, it's not just about yields. We want to think about how we can continually cycle things. And one of those is through mulching. So again, this stacking functions. If we have a plant and we harvest what we want, anything that we can't eat or we don't want to eat, we can either compost that or we can mulch it. We can just put it back on the soil. Those nutrients will soak into the soil. and we will be able to benefit from that next season, you know, because this is about the long game, not the short game. And they distribute essential nutrients from the soil, the sun, the water, and the air. You know, whether it's through photosynthesis, whether it's through these endophytic relationships that the plants have with things like fungi, there is a constant partnership with the nutrients and the elements between the elemental functions of the plants and the soils and the microbes. They are constantly cycling, constantly absorbing, and, you know, even dispersing certain things. So a plant will disperse carbohydrates for the microbes to feed on. The microbes will then, in exchange, give back the nutrients that the plant needs, because it's both within the plant's favor and the microbes' favor to have this relationship. It's about a win-win, you know. And when you get pathogenic fungi or pathogenic bacteria or diseases or viruses, they're trying to tell you something, that something's not right, something's not within balance. And physically, polycultures come in a physical form as well. So when you have a food forest, for instance, or even a guild, let's just take the three sisters. So you've got corn, squash, and beans. Each of those elements is providing many different functions, but really, this is just some of them, but they're providing space. So some plants like to grow low, some like to grow high, some like to sprawl out. When you start to understand what each of these does, you can actually place these elements together and create something that is much stronger. And time. So if any of you have heard of succession, you can plant certain plants at the beginning of the season. Once you can crop them, you can then put another plant in their place. And you can actually do this throughout the whole year. One example of this, which is very famous, is cover crops. So when your main crop has been harvested, you can then actually put a cover crop in its place. And that does a couple of things. It covers the soil and it adds things like nitrogen back into the soil that the previous crop would have taken out. And then they provide protection. So the squash leaves in the Three Sisters, they provide protection from the soil, for the soil, sorry. So you're, if it's hot, that it's protected from the sun, and that links into the whole shade thing as well. If there's a heavy downpour, those squash leaves are just going to allow that rain to gently go into the soil rather than smashing it down, because believe it or not, a heavy rain shower hits the soil, a lot of those nutrients, the soluble ones, are going to get dispersed out of the soil. And you also have certain plants that are very good at tilling the soil. They're natural tillers. So things like daikon radish, also known as mooli, they actually have really deep tap roots. You get this with rhubarb as well. And they will actually break up the soil. So these things are great for planting. If you want to plant something else, you can plant loads of daikon radish, you get a crop, and they till up the soil as well. Okay. And absorbing. So things like peas and beans in the Three Sisters will absorb nitrogen from the air and put it into the soil. They have little root nodules, nitrogen fixing nodules, which will grow on the pea when it's fixing nitrogen from the air. And that really helps to add the nitrogen to the soil, which benefits the squash because they're heavy nitrogen feeders. And then you also have sacrificing plants. So if you have a delicate crop that you want to protect, you can plant certain things around it that you don't mind sacrificing. We've just planted out loads of lettuce and I like lettuce, but I'm not a massive fan of it. So if a slug and a snail, we've done this between our beans, we've done the whole tripod, and we put this in between the beans. So the slug and the snails are more likely to go for the lettuce than the beans, because it's a really delicate crop and it's easier for them to eat. So these are just little examples of what you can do, simple examples. And electrically, this has been missed from agriculture for a long time, but the soil is electric. It holds a negative charge, it's paramagnetic. There's actually things you can add to the soil to make it more paramagnetic, like volcanic rock dust, and things like biochar and bioceramic powder. But essentially, the soil does naturally hold a charge. It's actually an ionic exchange, and it's an ionic exchange between the soil and the ionosphere. And the plant is the conduit between the soil and the sky. The plant is actually absorbing that energy, putting it into the soil, and it turns into electrical energy. The same thing happens within us. The mitochondria within our own cells changes the carbohydrates from the plants that we eat into electrical energy to fuel our bodies. I mean, this is like, it's mind-blowing, you know, and we're just at the beginning of what really is actually going on the soil and how much charge the soil can hold. So the more charge the soil holds, the more energy is in there, and the more energy, the healthier your system. So knowing how these things are actually connected is really important. So this electrical communication between the plants and the fungi is fundamental to any polyculture. If we don't have fungi in there, you know, fungi has a relationship with over 90% of the plants on the planet. Not so much brassicas, although there is a connection there. If you put in things like trichoderma, if trichoderma is in the soil, then fungi can form a relationship with brassica. But what we're really talking about is that if you have one of these elements missing, whether it's the fungi or the bacteria, or whether it's the biology, the chemistry, or the electricity, your polyculture system is going to be weak. Now, I don't want to overload you guys with too much information. You obviously take what you want from this, and if you want any questions to clarify what I've said, then, as I said before, just let me know. And certain plants will actually help to create more energy and more charge in the soil. So this is all like food for thought. And polycultures is about attracting insects and birds and pollinating insects and other small animals, which can benefit all of your plants. If we don't have animals in our system will be weak. Now, there's, going back to the slugs and the snails, many gardeners' worst nightmare. Now, rather than putting slug pellets down and contaminating the whole system, or putting beer traps out and killing the slugs, slugs do have a place. One, they're trying to tell you what's weak. But you can bring in things like leopard slugs. They are carnivorous slugs and they will eat other slugs. Or if you're not really a fan of slugs, you can try and bring in these other animals. So the thrush, the butterfly, the bee, and the hedgehog, you can build little ecosystems for them to come into your garden. You can attract them into your garden so they can actually do the insect management for you, or if you want to call them pests, that's cool. But the other benefits they have is they carry microbes from other plants. They're obviously pollinating plants as well. They distribute manure as well, And as I said before, they keep pests under control. It's biodiversity. We're always looking for polyculture is just another way of saying biodiversity. That's it. And polycultures protect our crops against the elements. So whether we have a big flood, or we have months without rain, or we have really windy weather, or our soil is cracked and all this, what we're trying to do is the more plants we have in the system, the better protected they are. As I said before, if you've got more plants in your system and you have a flood, what you're actually going to experience is those plants can absorb up that water and they can keep that water table low. And the plant roots, more room for the water to absorb. If you don't have any plants in the soil, the water's just going to sit on top, especially when you have compaction. And that's one of the biggest problems with agriculture is compaction. Compaction is what causes flooding. Yeah. Think of concrete. The flooding that happened recently, the flash floods, happened because we've got concrete everywhere, or they happen because the fields are compacted. It's very rare that forests or woodland get flooding. Sometimes they do, but this tends to be where people have walked and you've got compaction. But the more organic matter, so the more plants and the better the soil is, the more structure it has, the more fungi in there, the more bacteria in there, the more worms in there, the less likely it's going to be flooded. And the same goes for drought as well. Drought usually only occurs because there's a lack of water. So if we treat our ecosystems right and we allow the water to absorb into it, the water table will rise. And when we have drought, the water's there. Yeah, it's underneath the soil. The plants can access it through their roots. And the same with wind. If you have nice tall plants and bushy plants, they can protect your less delicate crops from whatever way the wind's coming. And this is part of permaculture. Polycultures is about considering every element possible so we can build an ecosystem that is really abundant, resistant, and resilient and healthy. So communities in the garden. After that bit of information there, I know it's a lot to kind of take in. Sit back, whether you're in a garden, on your allotment, on your balcony, sit back and just observe what and who is communicating. What birds you've got in your garden, what insects you've got in your garden, what relationships can you see developing? What relationships are there already? This will give you an indication of the health of your garden and also what you might need to do to make it healthier. And what do they exchange? Whether it's pollen or whether it's the microbes in the soil that are exchanging information. For instance, in a forest, plants are exchanging and trees are exchanging information all the time. They're exchanging information about where nutrients are. They're exchanging information about what pests are around. We're only just starting to, this is the greatest thing about modern technology. We're starting to realize just how advanced plants are and how they communicate. And they're exchanging protons and electrons. So back to the electrical component of soil, protons are being exchanged all the time, and it's all happening around the plant root. This is where the information is actually able to transfer between plants and between microbes and the plants themselves. So if we sit back and we observe and we can see the health of our plants, we can see what's actually happening underneath the soil to an extent. So some examples of companion planting. This is a really cool way to start experiencing and experimenting with polycultures. So you can find this information anywhere. Just type in companion planting and it'll come up with lots of different examples. But so for instance, carrots. So beans work with carrots, lettuce work with carrots, onions work with carrots, peas, radish, and tomatoes. And so these are all beneficial to each other. They'll grow together well. Now, sometimes this is about, as I said before, about protection and shade. Sometimes it's just that they're not fighting for the same nutrients. And sometimes it's because they have similar endophytic relationships with bacteria and fungi. So something you can do to protect your carrots is plant rosemary and sage, and that actually deters carrot flies. Plus, you get another crop. And so if you want to start off with something, that's a really good thing to start off with. I just recently, with my girlfriend, I just planted out. We had garlic in the bed from last year, so we planted out loads of onions. We planted out kale, lettuce, and chard. So those things work together well as well. And next up, we've got the cabbage family. So that's kale, obviously cabbage, even things like Romanesca and many others as well. You've got kohlrabi and Chinese cabbage. But what works well with the cabbage family? So you've got beetroot, celery, chard, cucumber, lettuce, onion, potato, and spinach. Again, these things aren't going to be fighting for the same nutrients. Some of these will only need a particular nutrient in a certain amount, and there'll be enough left over. And some of them grow tall, some of them are quite low growing, so they're all and also in succession as well. So things like spinach and chard, and lettuce, you can keep planting these out throughout a bigger window, a few months window. There's even certain spinach that you can grow throughout the year as well. So again, it's about understanding the relationships between these things and the relationships with the biology and the chemistry that allow us to start to form a better picture about what works and what doesn't. Again, you might live in an area that is more susceptible to carrot fly because it's warmer or it's more damp. You might not want to plant tomatoes because you live in an area that suffers with blight. Yeah. So I'm not here to tell you everything. I'm just here to kind of give you ideas, and then you can do your own research and start thinking, oh, okay, what do I like to eat? What doesn't work well? Speak to local gardeners or farmers if you live in an area where there's farms, and ask them what works and what doesn't work. What do they have problems with? Because that will give you an indication. Now, obviously, we can condition the soil and condition the ecosystem to actually become a lot stronger. So a lot of these things we can actually eradicate disease and pests once our plants become strong. And polycultures is one of the best ways to do this. So with the cabbage family, there's a couple of things in the brackets there that really help with pest management. So chamomile and garlic improve growth. Rosemary and sage deter cabbage moth. Nasturtiums deter bugs, beetles, and aphids. And tansy and thyme deter cabbage worm. These pests can really be a pest. You might have got your crop, 2/3 of the way through its growth, and you're nearly there. You're nearly about to crop it, and then all of a sudden something comes along and just literally destroys it. And it's so disheartening. It's happened to me many times, and I get really frustrated and really angry, and I want to give up. But that's my ego. That's my ego telling me that. If I sit back and just think, what's nature trying to tell me? What's it actually trying to tell me? Then I can get out of my head and start to interact and have more of a relationship with and understand that, you know, these animals have a place as well. But if our system's out of balance, these animals can just explode. It's like when you take a predator out of an ecosystem, the prey will just boom. And that causes a lot of problems because, you know, if you've got a herbivore that doesn't have a predator, that herbivore is going to eat everything. And we're experiencing a lot of this at the moment, you know. So it's really important, you know, if you've got an infestation of snails, you need to get slow worms in, you need to get hedgehogs in, you need to get thrushes in, you need to, you know, you need to get the animals that are actually going to help control that infestation. So guilds, the most famous of these, as I mentioned before, is the Three Sisters. So we got the corns, the beans, and the squash. So the corn is known as a C4 grass. It fixes loads and loads of carbon, and carbon is the building block of all life. Everything, along with hydrogen, oxygen, and and carbon, these are the building blocks of life. It is in every element. Every molecule has these elements in it. So corn is, along with things like sorghum and amaranth, they are really good at fixing carbon. So it's really important that we remember that this polyculture thing is throughout everything. It's from the microcosm to the macrocosm. And then we have beans and peas. So the beans and peas fix the nitrogen. What they also do is they can trail up the corn. Yeah. So that's what you call stacking functions. And then the squash, both obviously the corn and the beans are vertical. And then you have your squash. Your squash is really heavy nitrogen feeder. You know, it leaves a lot of nitrogen. If you haven't got beans planted in with the squash, you need to find a nitrogen source like manure. Please stay away from chemical nitrogen fertilizers. And the squash, as I said before, provides that cover for the soil. Yeah, so the squash leaves are massive, so you're getting more photosynthesis. The beans and the peas are feeding the squash. The peas, you get a lot. You know, beans and peas produce an abundance of yield. Plus, especially peas, they're really high in protein. And your squash is delicious. You know, I love squash. There's so many varieties, and you can keep squash for months and months and months. Me and my girlfriend grew some Anna Schwartz squashes last year, and we did one the other day in a curry. It's like 5 months old, and it was still fresh. You know, so as long as you store them in the right way, they'll be good. And another guild, which is fairly new, which was discovered by my teacher, Matt Powers, is the Five Cousins. This was for his area. You know, he was in California, then Texas, but most of these will grow in this country. Okay, so we have amaranth, buckwheat, daikon radish, peas, and sorghum. So amaranth, as I said before, is a carbon capture. It's a C3, C4 grass. Buckwheat is an amazing thing. You know, buckwheat, if anyone knows, it's a grain. It's an ancient grain. And daikon radish is a natural tiller. And peas fix nitrogen. And sorghum also captures a lot of carbon. Now, the relationships between these two is between these five is pretty amazing. So the peas are fixing nitrogen. The buckwheat and the daikon radish are stealing nitrogen from the peas. So the peas, by its very nature, will fix even more nitrogen. So you're not only feeding your buckwheat and your daikon radish, with the peas, but also you're feeding the rest of your soil as well. And so you're adding the carbon with the amaranth and the sorghum, you're adding the nitrogen with the peas, and the buckwheat is taking the nitrogen, but the peas are producing more nitrogen. The daikon radish is tilling, and it's also solubilizing phosphorus. So you're getting 3 essential nutrients, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, from these 5 cousins. And this is why they work together so well. And this is why they benefit each other so well. And the greatest thing about guilds is you'll get a far bigger yield by growing a guild or companion plants than you would just growing one crop in the same area. It's less susceptible to disease, it's stronger, it's more resilient, it's better for the soil, it's better for us because we have a variety, and you're going to have a better community of microbes, etc. So food forest and food garden, as I said, I've built one of these or created one of these on my allotment, and it's a multi-layered edible ecosystem. But you can also provide medicinal benefits, pollination, tillage of soil, adding nutrients to the soil. And this is why this works so well, because you can have up to 7 layers. You have your ground cover and your root layer. So your root layer can involve mushrooms or fungi. And then you have your ground cover, which can be your cover crops and things like strawberries. And then you have your herbs, so you can have your perennial herbs, which are acting as a pest management. They're aromatic, they're medicinal. Then you have your shrubs, so they can be nitrogen fixing and they can provide a windbreak. And then you have your bushes, so your fruit bushes and your small trees like your dwarf trees. They provide an excellent crop and they will last for decades. And then you have your canopy. So in bigger food forests, you can have like your nut trees and your bigger trees, so your standard apples and your standard plums. And then you have your climbers, and your climbers can be anything from grapes to hardy kiwis. So I hope you're kind of getting what I'm trying to allude to here, is that once we start to expand our understanding, we start to really contemplate what is actually possible, that we can grow an abundance of really healthy food on a fairly small area. So food forests are really a combination of companions and guilds working together. So an example of a guild in a food forest would be a fruit tree guild. So you can have an apple or a pear, you can have nitrogen fixers around it, and then you can have things like sage and chives and rhubarb and comfrey. So you're starting to build many functions out of one number of elements. So agroforestry, this is for obviously farmers, etc., but it's the management of trees, herbs, veg, and grains. So by growing these together in big tracts of land, what you're doing is you're mitigating against using too much water. You don't have to be using fertilizers. You can mitigate against pests, etc. You can imagine managing, thousands of acres. Agroforestry is a perfect choice, a perfect way that we can actually transition over from this industrial agriculture model, which is so poisonous, to something which is healthier and more natural. This is happening all over the world. I know people that are doing it or considering doing it, and it's really exciting that we can, start to explore this in the UK. And silvo pasture. So this is about grazing animals among trees and herb crops. As you can see, some chickens, they're just picking up the grubs, they're picking up the snails, they're eating the weeds. So they are managing the crops for us. We don't, we can hand this, what this is about is handing this over to nature, and we can become the observers. We can still steward it, but we don't have to get so involved. You know, we can just see how things pan out and see how things evolve. And then this is more of like a sum up of what polycultures are and how they exist, you know, so the microbes, the plant roots, and the fungi. So from photosynthesis, the start of your crops growing, to the fruit and seed production, which is the end step of that particular cycle. Each of those steps, or each step within this, is a symbiotic exchange between the plants, the microbes, the fungi, and the animals, and that includes us. We can just gather a hand of seeds, scatter it, give it a water, and they will be the viable seed for next year's crop. We can chop and drop, you know, so once we've harvested, we can just chop down the rest of the stuff we're not going to eat, and that will be the mulch for the next year. So after sharing all that, the leading role in a companion plant or a polyculture or a guild, who will be the protagonist? Who's going to be the leader? What? And that's up to you. So it's either, it can be the one that produces the biggest yield. It can be the plant that you like the taste of the most. But this is the thing that's going to bring the most to your alliance. Yeah. So it can even be a herb that you love to eat that protects your plants. You know, the choice is up to you. There's no real right or wrong to this. Supporting roles. So what plants will protect your valuable and delicate crops? Think about plants that are strong and resistant. They have natural pest repellents, and ones that you don't mind sacrificing, or ones that you can plant out continually over months and months. You know, so as I said before, lettuce, you can plant that for months and months on end, and you can harvest these every month. So if you get enough lettuce seed in, you know, how much lettuce can you eat? Yeah, so it's just about thinking about the bigger picture, about the holistic view of it all. So how many functions does each element perform within the group? Again, stacking functions. Plants can provide more than just food. They can be mulch. They can provide medicinal benefits. They can provide shade. They can provide ground cover. They can feed the soil. They can fix nitrogen, etc. Ideally, you want to think about each element to have 3 or more functions. That way, you're going to be getting more from your system. You're going to spend less money. You're going to take less time. You're going to have more time to observe, to chill out, to relax, to spend time with your family, you know. So this isn't just about growing food. This is about having a more healthy life, having a more abundant life, having more time with your family, not going to the supermarket and buying substandard food. Yeah. Even if you're just growing lettuce, it's better to grow lettuce yourself than to go and get it from the supermarket. You know, it might be cheap, but as we see with food prices, all these things are changing. So I'm trying to encourage everyone to be more self-sufficient, you know, and if you can't grow something yourself, find someone who can grow it for you and share the produce with them. You know, most people have a good network around them, and they can, and even if you don't find people, you can find people through, you know, services like myself. So perennials versus annuals. I used to grow just annuals, but I've now started to transition more over to perennials, because I see that although they take longer to get going, they're actually going to provide more of a yield for you over time. And you can compare this to the whole polyculture and monoculture thing. So monocultures can provide a lot of yield, right? But the more we take out of the ground over time, the less that monoculture is going to provide for us. It's the same with annuals. Is if you're just growing annuals all the time, you're going to have to keep adding nutrients to your soil, because when you dig that up, you're disturbing that balance. So you're taking nutrients out. So companion planting is great for the annuals, but I would advise and, really encourage you to start adding perennials if you're not, and think about, a plum tree against a tomato plant. A plum tree will last for 30, 40 years, and as long as you take care of it, it will provide you plums on a regular basis. With tomatoes, although they're really great, and actually, if you go back way thousands of years, tomatoes were probably more of a perennial than an annual. And you can combine the two, so neither is wrong. It's whatever suits your context. So perennials are long-term investment for us and the soil, and require much less work, and their yields increase year on year. Annuals give us quick yields and carbohydrates and can act as a bridge to perennials. So just a few examples: aromatic herbs, perennial herbs, can protect our delicate annual green crops, and annual green ground cover can provide a nitrogen boost for fruit trees. So they do work really well together, and you're going to get this in nature as well. Remember, polycultures are everywhere. They are a representation of a dynamic relationship where everything has purpose and contributes in one or more ways. This also includes pathogens and viruses and pests. They are trying to tell us something. The health of your crops is about diversity, roles, and balance. So I ask you the question, what polycultures will you explore? Do you want to do companion planting? Do you want to try the Three Sisters? Do you want to try one of your own? Do you even want to try and build a food forest? Are you a farmer? Would you like to try agroforestry or silvopasture? The world is ours to explore. We can build something really beautiful. We can do this through finding our passion, by creating community, and by learning about what health and abundance really means. The more self-sufficient, or the more self-resilient and community sufficient we become, the less we're going to be affected by the global changes that are happening right now. So I ask you all, if you would like to, please email me with your questions. As I said, you can be sowseedgrowfeed@protonmail.com. I'll answer everyone's question. It may take me some time, but I endeavour to get back to people within 2 days. I'd also like to kind of just tell you about what's going to be happening in the future. I'm going to make a little bit of a change to what I'm doing. I'm actually going to be doing workshops. So my vision is to actually make these more interactive, because I realize listening to me can be a bit of a bore sometimes, and people's concentration and focus, we've got a lot of stuff going on, is what I'm trying to say. So, and it's a lot of information. So what I'm going to do next time in June is set up a workshop, and I'm going to make it interactive. So I'm going to talk a little bit, like 5 or 10 minutes about something, and I'm going to ask a question, maybe set a task about what you can start thinking about in regards to permaculture and soil biology and regeneration, etc. So any comments, any questions, feel free to email me. It's better to email me than to post it on YouTube, because I don't check it as often as I want to. And I wish you all well. Now's a time for planting out. Even we still sow seeds right now, and making plans about what you want to for your future. What type of life do you want? I'm continually evolving my vision, and as I learn new stuff, my understanding starts to expand, my confidence grows, my courage grows, and we could all do with that. So thanks for your time, and I hope you're all well. Continue sowing and growing. Until next time, goodbye.